hum of the old refrigerator was the loudest thing in my apartment, a monotonous drone that mirrored the soundtrack of my life. Dishes piled in the sink, a monument to my apathy. Dust motes danced in the thin shafts of light that pierced the grimy window, each one a tiny, insignificant speck. Just like me, I supposed. I traced a finger through the film on the windowsill, the grit clinging to my skin. Dean, that's still me, I think. I used to look up, not just at the sky. Into it. When I was younger, the stars were promises, glittering pathways to wonder. Now they were just pinpricks of light, predictable and cold. The universe, once a boundless ocean of possibility, had shrunk to a sterile mathematical equation. My astrophysics degree hung on the wall, a faded testament to a fire long since extinguished. It felt like a cruel joke, a degree in the infinite from a man who felt utterly, suffocatingly finite. My work was data. Endless streams of telemetry, spectral analysis, orbital decay calculations. The thrill of discovery had curdled into the drudgery of routine. I'd spent years sifting through the cosmic static, searching for whispers of the extraordinary, only to be rewarded with the deafening silence of the mundane. It was late, the kind of late where the city outside held its breath, a temporary lull before the next wave of noise. I was staring at a particularly uninspiring dataset, a routine scan of a largely unremarkable sector designated Quadrant 7G-Beta. Nothing but gas clouds and stray asteroids, the cosmic equivalent of a forgotten attic. My fingers moved across the keyboard, a practiced dance of keystrokes that felt more like a dirge than a discovery. Then something flickered, a deviation, tiny, almost imperceptible, but there. A signal, not the usual cosmic background radiation, not a pulsar's steady beat, not the dying gasp of a supernova. This was different. It was a pattern, a sequence, structured. My brow furrowed. I zoomed in, my eyes straining against the low light of the monitor. But it was persistent. It wasn't random noise. It had a rhythm, a deliberate, almost intelligent rhythm. My breath hitched. This wasn't in the textbooks. This wasn't a known celestial phenomenon. I ran the diagnostics again, my heart thumping a nervous tattoo against my ribs. Equipment malfunction. Unlikely, I triple-checked the calibration. Interference? From where? This sector was supposed to be empty. Utterly, profoundly empty. The signal pulsed, a faint heartbeat in the vast, silent expanse. It was coming from deep within 7G-Beta, a region of space so desolate, so devoid of any known astronomical interest, that it was rarely even scanned. It was the cosmic equivalent of a dead end. This was the kind of thing I'd dreamed of, the anomaly that would reignite the spark. But this felt wrong. The signal wasn't just a pattern, it was intricate, layered. It felt ancient, and it was growing subtly, almost imperceptibly in strength. I pulled up the visual data, a composite of infrared and radio wavelengths, nothing but the ghostly outlines of nebulae light-years away. Yet the signal persisted, a phantom limb reaching out from the emptiness. It was a contradiction that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. My fingers, usually so steady, trembled as I typed. I cross-referenced the coordinates with every known celestial object, every recorded anomaly, every theoretical construct. Nothing. It was like trying to find a specific grain of sand on an infinite beach, except this grain of sand was broadcasting a complex, alien symphony. A sudden, sharp jolt ran through the building. The signal on my screen seemed to brighten. It was then, in that sudden, suffocating quiet, that a new set of coordinates flashed across my monitor, superimposed over the empty space of 7G-Beta. Not from the signal itself, but something triggered by it. A faint, almost ghost-like signature appearing out of nowhere. It was the designation of a vessel, a derelict, a cargo ship adrift in fog, crew gone, engines running. The registry data was ancient, flagged as lost decades ago in the outer shipping lanes. But the coordinates, they were impossibly, terrifyingly close to the source of the signal. Why would a lost cargo ship be broadcasting from a supposedly empty, unexplored sector of space? And why was its signal appearing now, coinciding with this strange, anomalous transmission, just like me I'd thought? Then the signal came. It wasn't a radio wave, not in any conventional sense. It was a presence, a ripple in the otherwise placid void of Sector 7G, a patch of space I'd always dismissed as a cosmic dead zone. My equipment, cobbled together from salvaged parts and sheer stubbornness, had snagged it, a whisper from nowhere. I'd locked myself away, a hermit in my own decaying dwelling, fueled by stale coffee and a gnawing curiosity that had begun to feel like a physical hunger. The apartment was a disaster zone, charts and printouts strewn across every surface, mathematical scribbles bleeding into the margins of forgotten books. My fingers were permanently stained with ink, my eyes perpetually red-rimmed. The signal was unlike anything I'd ever encountered. It possessed a structure, a deliberate complexity that defied random chance. It wasn't a star's dying gasp or the chaotic symphony of a nebula. It was organized, and it was old. So impossibly, terrifyingly old, the dating algorithms I ran kept spitting out errors, looping back to themselves, unable to compute a temporal origin point. It was like trying to measure the depth of a well that had no bottom. I'd rerouted power from my ancient toaster, bypassed the safety protocols on my homemade amplifier. Anything to get a clearer lock, a sharper picture of this anomaly. The data streams flickered across my salvaged monitor, a cascade of alien symbols that felt both meaningless and profoundly significant. They pulsed with a rhythm that didn't align with any known celestial body. It was a language I couldn't understand, but my instincts screamed that it was trying to say something. One particularly dense data packet had sent my thermal sensors into a frenzy. Wrongness. It was impossible. Physics, as I understood it, had no room for such a thing. I leaned closer to the screen, my breath fogging the glass. The pattern within that packet was fractal, repeating itself infinitely, yet never quite the same. This wasn't just a signal, it was a fingerprint. A sharp rapping at my door shattered the fragile quiet. I flinched, my heart jumping into my throat. No one ever came here. I'd made sure of that. "Dean, I in there?" A voice, muffled but familiar, called out. It was the building superintendent, a gruff man named Frank who usually only appeared to collect rent or complain about the noise. I froze, my hand hovering over the kill switch for my rig. The signal was still there, humming beneath the surface of my consciousness, a silent, insistent presence. I didn't want Frank or anyone to know what I was hearing. "Yeah, Frank, I'm here," I managed, my voice rough from disuse. I cleared my throat, trying to sound normal, whatever that meant anymore. He grumbled something about a plumbing issue on the floor below, but his tone was laced with an unusual curiosity. "I've been holed up in there for days, Dean. Haven't seen hide nor hair of I, everything all right. Just working on a project," I said, forcing a casual tone. "Been really engrossed." He let out a skeptical snort. "Project, right? I sure ain't letting this signal thing get to I." Had I been muttering? I didn't remember. The signal was consuming me, eroding the edges of my awareness. "It's fascinating, Frank, that's all." He paused, and I could almost feel his gaze through the thin wood of the door. "Fascinating, look, Dean, I'm just saying. This whole building's got a weird vibe, always has. Especially down in the sub-basement, heard stories." Sub-basement? I'd never even been down there. It was supposedly just storage, forgotten relics of the building's past. Just things that don't make sense. Like that old cargo ship adrift in fog, crew gone, engines running. They say it just appeared one day, docked at the old wharf, no one knowing where it came from. Just sitting there, silent, fog clinging to it like a shroud. A cargo ship, adrift in fog, crew gone, engines running. Frank cleared his throat. "Anyway, just checking in. Don't go too crazy in there, all right?" He shuffled away, his footsteps fading down the hall. I leaned my forehead against the cool wood of the door, my mind reeling. A cargo ship. A signal from an empty sector. Was it all connected? I turned back to my monitor, the alien script seeming to writhe and shift. The impossible data packet pulsed with renewed intensity, and a single, terrifying thought took root. What if this signal wasn't just a message, but a key to something that should have remained locked away forever? They weren't random. They were a location, coordinates, a place that was very, very close. And why did it feel like it was calling to me? The static on the comms unit crackled, a sound I'd grown to associate with the gnawing emptiness of space. But this time, it was different. It wasn't just noise. Beneath the hiss and pop, something else pulsed, a faint, rhythmic thrumming that vibrated through the deck plates of this derelict. A cargo ship adrift in fog, crew gone, engines running. The words felt absurd, even as my boots echoed on the metal floor. I'd found it drifting, a ghost in the perpetual twilight of this unnerving nebula, its external lights blinking feebly like dying stars. My fingers, still stained with the faint, metallic tang of the strange fluid I'd sampled from the ship's coolant system, a fluid that defied every known chemical signature, traced the rough weld lines on a bulkhead. The air here was thick, cloying, smelling of ozone and something else. something organic and ancient, like damp earth left to rot for millennia. It clung to the back of my throat, a constant, unpleasant reminder that I was alone, adrift in the echoing silence of this vessel. Back in my makeshift lab, the repurposed cargo bay that served as my temporary sanctuary, the alien script on my monitor pulsed with an unnatural luminescence. It had been hours since I'd stumbled upon the data packet, a fragment of pure, unadulterated strangeness that had somehow hitched a ride on the signal I'd first detected. My original calculations pointed to a void, a region of space so devoid of matter and energy that it should have been screaming silence. Instead, it had broadcasted this. I'd spent the last cycle, the last agonizing stretch of time, trying to break it down to find a pattern, a Rosetta Stone within the impossible symbols. This wasn't code. It wasn't language as I understood it. It was architecture. The symbols shifted and reformed, not like letters on a screen, but like intricate, three-dimensional structures folding in on themselves. I felt a prickling sensation on my skin, as if the very air around me was beginning to warp. My breath hitched. A subtle change. A new sequence of symbols had appeared, overlaying the others like a ghost image. It was simpler, more direct, and it was familiar in a horrifying, deeply unsettling way. It echoed the fundamental constants of the universe, the very laws that govern the dance of galaxies and the spin of atoms. But it wasn't a description. It was an instruction, a set of parameters. My hands trembled as I began to isolate the repeating motifs. They weren't random. They were precise, elegant, and utterly alien. This wasn't a message from somewhere. It was a blueprint, a design. The signal itself was not a broadcast, but a ripple, a consequence of something vast and ancient acting within that supposedly empty sector. A low hum began to emanate from the ship's dormant systems. Not the steady thrum of the engines, but a deeper, resonant vibration that seemed to originate from the very hull. It was the same frequency as the alien script, the same pulse I'd felt through the deck plates. The data packet wasn't just information, it was an active component. It was doing something. My eyes darted around the cargo bay. The smell of ozone intensified, sharp and acrid, making my eyes water. I felt a pressure building behind my temples, a dull ache that was rapidly escalating. I focused back on the monitor, my gaze locked on the unfolding sequence. The parameters were becoming clearer, more defined. They spoke of dimensions, of geometries that twisted and folded in ways my mind struggled to grasp. The empty sector wasn't empty, it was occupied, and whatever occupied it was using this signal, this data, to reshape reality itself. A faint, shimmering distortion appeared in the air above my console. It was almost imperceptible at first, like heat haze rising from a summer road. But it grew, coalescing into a faint, swirling vortex of impossible colors that defied description, colors that felt wrong, that made my eyes ache. It pulsed in time with the hum, with the alien script. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic bird trapped in a cage. This wasn't just a discovery, it was an intrusion. The signal wasn't a message to be read, it was a key being turned. And whatever was on the other side was now beginning to push through. The cargo ship, adrift and silent, was not just a vessel, it was a threshold. I backed away from the console, my movements jerky. The hum grew louder, a guttural thrum that vibrated in my bones. I could feel it now, a palpable presence, something ancient and vast and utterly indifferent to my existence. Was this what the crew had encountered? Had they been erased, or worse, absorbed? The alien script on the monitor flickered, and for a terrifying moment I saw not symbols but eyes. What was it building, and why here? This cargo ship adrift in fog, crew gone, engines running. It was like a heartbeat, slow and deep, echoing from the bowels of the vessel. I pressed my ear closer to the speaker, straining to decipher the pattern. It wasn't random. There was a cadence, a deliberate sequence that felt significant. My fingers, numb with the cold that had settled into my bones, fumbled with the dials, trying to isolate the frequency, to pull it from the cacophony of cosmic interference. The signal was weak, buried, but it was there, and it was coming from inside the ship. My breath hitched. This was no longer just about a strange anomaly in the void. This was here, now, tangible. The metallic tang of the air, usually so stale and familiar, seemed sharper, laced with something else. Something acrid and unsettling. A subtle shift in the ship's groaning timbers registered, a settling that felt less like the natural sway of the sea and more like a colossal organism shifting in its sleep. I stood, my joints protesting. The low hum of the engines, a constant companion since I'd boarded, seemed to deepen, the vibrations intensifying. They weren't just running, they were thrumming in sympathy with that hidden pulse. It was a disturbing resonance, a disturbing harmony. My gaze swept across the cramped bridge. Dust motes danced in the weak beams of my headlamp, illuminating the abandoned controls, the empty captain's chair. The fog pressed against the reinforced windows, a thick, suffocating blanket that rendered the outside world a complete unknown. It had been like this for days, a silent white shroud, pregnant. The rhythmic pulsing from the comms unit grew fractionally louder. It was drawing me in, a siren song of pure, unadulterated data. My boots clanged on the metal floor, each step a defiant declaration against the encroaching unease. The thrumming was undeniable now, a physical sensation in my chest, a pressure behind my eyes. I reached the cargo hold. It was vast, cavernous, a cathedral of forgotten goods. Crates stacked high loomed like monoliths in the dim light, and the smell, it was no longer just stale. There was a faint, coppery scent, like old blood, mixed with something else. Something earthy and decaying, but not of this world. It clung to the back of my throat, a persistent, unwelcome guest. My headlamp beam swept across the floor, catching on something that made my stomach clench. Not oil, not water. It hadn't been there before, I was certain of it. I traced the edge of one pool with the toe of my boot. It was cool to the touch, impossibly smooth, and it didn't evaporate like water. Then I heard it, not through the comms anymore. It was closer. It was a dry, rasping articulation, a language of scraped stone and dying stars. It spoke no words I understood, yet the meaning was horribly clear. Attention. My heart, a traitorous organ, began to hammer against my ribs. My hands trembled, the beam of my headlamp dancing erratically. I wanted to turn, to flee back up the ladder, back to the relative sanity of the bridge, but my feet were rooted. It wasn't a shadow cast by any object. It was an absence of light, a tear in the fabric of vision. It pulsed, mirroring the rhythm I'd heard, growing larger, coalescing. It was an impossible shape, a geometry that defied logic, a thing that hurt my eyes to look at directly. This was what had been broadcasting. This was what had drawn me here. It was no longer a signal. It was an invitation or a trap. My mind screamed for me to run, but a morbid fascination, a scientist's insatiable need to understand, held me captive. What? I could feel the pressure behind my eyes building, a psychic weight that threatened to crack my skull. Was this the source of the anomaly? Was this the ancient truth I had so foolishly sought? And if it was, what did it want with me here, in this forgotten vessel adrift in the endless fog? The hum of the engines was a constant, a deep vibration that seemed to resonate in my bones. It was the only sound besides the muted groan of the hull, a sound that spoke of the immense, unseen forces pressing in on this derelict vessel. Fog, thick and cloying, pressed against the reinforced glass of the bridge, obscuring any view of the outside. It was like being entombed. I ran a hand over the cold, smooth console. The rhythmic thrumming from the comms unit, the one that had first drawn me in, was still there, a heartbeat beneath the static. I was on a cargo ship adrift in fog, crew gone, engines running. A ghost ship, manned only by me and whatever had left it this way. My disillusionment with the sterile equations of astrophysics felt like a lifetime ago. Now it was just a memory, a faint echo against the deafening roar of this new reality. The entity, that's what I was calling it, the thing that pulsed in the signal, the thing that had apparently emptied this ship. I'd spent the last cycle exploring. Every compartment, every darkened corridor, every sealed storage bay. The silence was the worst. Not the absence of noise, but the wrongness of it. No footsteps, no voices, no stray coughs or clatter of tools. Just the ship's internal groan and the incessant, maddening pulse from the comms. The crew was gone, vanished. No signs of struggle, no bodies, nothing to indicate what had happened. It was as if they'd simply ceased to be. My own breath felt unnaturally loud in the stillness. I moved through the ship's galley, the air thick with the metallic tang of stale water and something else. Something faintly sweet, like decaying flowers. A half-eaten meal sat on a mess table, the food petrified, a macabre still life. The utensils were neatly stacked. It was too orderly, too undisturbed. It wasn't just a signal, it was a presence. It was ancient, I knew that much. Older than stars, older than the galaxies I had once charted with such detached fascination. And it was here, or at least its influence was. I found my way back to the bridge, the comms unit calling to me like a siren's song. The thrumming was stronger now, more insistent. I leaned closer, my ear almost pressed against the speaker. It wasn't just a pulse, it was a pattern, a complex, intricate sequence that defied any known language or coding, but it felt intentional, like a message or a lure. My fingers traced the dusty dials of the comms unit. I needed more, I needed to understand. The entity was powerful, that much was obvious. But what did it want? Was it a predator, a cosmic parasite feeding on ships and their crews, or was it something else entirely, something that perceived existence in ways I couldn't even begin to grasp? I remembered the old star charts I'd found in the captain's quarters, not the digital ones, but physical, rolled-up parchments tucked away in a locked locker. They were ancient, hand-drawn with faded ink, depicting constellations that no longer existed, or perhaps had never existed in our known universe. One chart in particular had caught my eye. It was a spiral not of stars, but of something else, something that seemed to emanate from a point of utter blackness, and at the center of that spiral a symbol that even now I couldn't shake from my mind. It was vaguely reminiscent of the patterns I was starting to hear in the comms signal. My gaze drifted to the sealed viewport. The fog seemed to press closer, a tangible barrier between me and everything. It was no longer just empty space. It was a canvas, and something vast and unknowable was painting upon it. I needed to find out what that symbol meant. I needed to find out if there was anyone else who knew about this. Had this happened before? There was this cargo ship adrift in fog, crew gone, engines running, just another stop on a long, silent journey for this entity. I reached for the comms unit again, my hand trembling slightly. The thrumming seemed to swell, a wave of something washing over me. It wasn't just sound. It was a feeling reaching for me. What was it trying to communicate? And more importantly, was it aware of me now? The fog pressed in, a suffocating shroud that muffled the world. The cargo ship adrift in fog, crew gone, engines running groaned around me, a symphony of stressed metal and unseen currents. Each creak of the hull felt like a sigh, a lament from a dying leviathan. I ran a gloved hand over the cold, damp console, the faint glow of the screens doing little to pierce the oppressive gloom. The signal, it was still there, a whisper in the static growing stronger. My breath hitched. It wasn't just a signal anymore. It was a presence, a vast, aching emptiness that seemed to seep from the very air. I could feel it in my teeth, a low thrumming that vibrated through my skull. The last transmission from the bridge, before the crew vanished, replayed in my mind. A choked gasp, a single terrified word, then silence. They hadn't just disappeared, they'd been unmade. I moved deeper into the ship, my boots echoing on the metal deck. I passed an open mess hall. Plates were still on the tables, half-eaten meals congealing. No footsteps, no voices, no rustle of clothing. My hand trembled as I reached for the hatch leading to the engine room. The Anomalies' influence was a physical weight, pressing down on my chest, making each breath a struggle. It felt like standing at the edge of a precipice, the ground crumbling beneath my feet. The signal pulsed, a siren song drawing me deeper into the belly of this decaying beast. I had to know, I had to understand. This wasn't just about a strange radio wave. It was about something that was actively unraveling. It slid open with a screech that grated on my nerves, a sound so sharp it cut through the fog's muffling embrace. The hum of the engines here was not a vibration, but a roar, a titanic thrumming that shook the very foundations of the ship. Steam hissed from ruptured pipes swirling in the dim light, and then I saw it. It wasn't a thing, not in any way I could define. It was a distortion, a tear in the fabric of the space within the engine room. It shimmered, like heat haze rising from asphalt, but instead of distorting light, it seemed to distort reality. Colors bled into each other, impossible hues that my eyes struggled to process. The metal of the engine housing warped and twisted as if viewed through a funhouse mirror. The air around it crackled with an unseen energy, and the hum of the engine seemed to be absorbed by it, sucked into its silent maw. This was the source. The anomaly wasn't a signal, it was a wound, a gaping, cosmic wound bleeding into our dimension. The crew. They hadn't just vanished, they had been consumed. The distortion pulsed, growing larger. The walls of the engine room seemed to ripple, the metal groaning as if under immense pressure. The signal, now a deafening roar in my mind, intensified, demanding. It was a hunger, an ancient, insatiable hunger. It was reaching out, its influence spreading like a stain, and this ship was just the first point of contact. I had to stop it. I had to close the tier, but how? It was beyond anything I understood, beyond any science I knew. It was wrong, utterly fundamentally wrong. My gaze fell on the main power conduit, a thick reinforced cable snaking across the floor. It was humming with raw energy, the lifeblood of the ship's dying heart. An idea, desperate and terrifying, bloomed in my mind. If I could overload it, channel all that power, perhaps I could force the tier shut. Or perhaps I would simply be consumed myself. Another ghost on this lost vessel. The distortion flared, a blinding flash of impossible light. The hum of the engines pitched higher, straining. The air grew thick, heavy, tasting of static and despair. I could feel it pushing, reaching for me. My own thoughts felt sluggish, like wading through treacle. It was trying to unmake me. I had to act. Now, my hand reached for the emergency shut-off for the main conduit, a heavy lever crusted with grease and time. My fingers brushed against the cold metal. Do I throw the switch, risking annihilation for a chance to save? What? Or do I retreat, leaving this cosmic horror to fester and spread, a slow, silent plague upon the stars? The choice was mine, and the weight of it threatened to crush me. The engines screamed. The distortion grew, and the fog outside seemed to press even closer, as if waiting for its moment. I ran a gloved hand over the cold, damp steel of the main corridor. Slick, not with condensation, but something thicker, darker. My breath hitched. The smell, too, was wrong. A coppery tang mixed with the brine like old pennies left out in the rain. I'd thought I understood. I'd glimpsed the edges of it, the impossible geometry, the silent, consuming hunger. I'd acted. It simply was. The hum of the engines was a constant, low thrum beneath my boots. They were still running just as I'd found them. Miles of empty ocean, a ghost vessel, and me. The signal was gone. The terrifying, beautiful, maddening signal that had drawn me here vanished. Had I imagined it? The sheer, crushing weight of the last few hours argued against that. I moved deeper into the ship, my flashlight beam cutting a shaky swath through the gloom. The mess hall was undisturbed, tables set with plates of half-eaten food, as if the crew had simply evaporated. A newspaper lay open, the headlines about a distant political squabble, now utterly absurd. A relic from a world that felt impossibly distant. I found the bridge. The captain's chair was empty, a logbook open on the console. The last entry was dated 3 days ago. Routine weather observations, nothing about the impossible. I traced the faded ink with a fingertip. The mundane details were the most unsettling, the sheer normalcy of it all, right up until the moment reality had decided to fray. My gaze drifted to the main viewport. The fog was a solid wall, opaque and absolute. I couldn't see the sea, the sky, or even the railing of the deck just beyond. It was a complete erasure of the outside world, yet I felt a pressure, a subtle distortion in the air, as if something vast and unseen was pressing against the glass, not with force but with sheer presence. A quiet curiosity. I remembered the calculations, the impossible vectors, the way the signal had pulsed, not like any known celestial event, but like a heartbeat. A slow, deliberate beat that seemed to resonate not just through space, but through time. And the patterns, I'd seen them fleetingly in the brief moments the signal had flared. They were intricate, maddeningly complex, like a language I was on the cusp of understanding, but which would only bring ruin if I ever did. I tried to disrupt it. A crude energy surge, rerouted from the ship's auxiliary power. A desperate, amateurish attempt to sever the connection. Had it worked? Or had I merely annoyed it? The silence was the worst part. It wasn't the absence of sound, but a charged emptiness, a vacuum that felt far more alive and dangerous than any noise. A soft scraping sound echoed from further down the corridor. My head snapped up. It was probably just the ship settling, I told myself, the old hull groaning under the strain of the unseen waves. The fog outside felt less like weather and more like a deliberate veil, a curtain drawn by something that preferred to remain unseen. The engines continued their monotonous drone, a fragile anchor in the encroaching strangeness. What had I done? Had my brief interference changed anything, or had I simply drawn its attention, like a child poking a sleeping titan? The ship creaked again, a long, drawn-out groan that seemed to originate from the very depths of its hull. It sounded less like metal and more like bone. I swallowed. The dry click in my throat unnervingly loud. The fog seemed to thicken, pressing in on the windows, on the very walls of the cargo ship adrift in fog, crew gone, engines running. The cold seeped through my gloves, a biting dampness that had nothing to do with the sea. It was a chill that settled deep in my bones, a premonition of a vast, indifferent emptiness. The air tasted metallic, like old blood and ozone. Just the low thrum of the engines, a persistent heartbeat in a dead body. I'd followed the signal here to this ghost ship, this derelict mausoleum adrift in a sea of white. The anomaly, the source. I kept moving, my boots echoing on the metal decks. The cargo hold was next. The signal had been strongest from this section. My heart hammered a frantic, irregular rhythm against my ribs, a counterpoint to the ship's steady pulse. But I knew it was more. It was the echo of what had happened. The heavy steel door to the cargo hold was ajar. The metallic tang in the air intensified, sharp and acrid. And then I heard it, not the ship's groans, but a sound from within the hold. A low, guttural hum vibrating not just in the air, but in the very deck beneath my feet. It was the sound of something ancient, something immense, stirring from a slumber that had spanned epochs. I stepped inside, my senses on high alert. The beams of my flashlight danced across stacks of crates, their labels faded and unreadable. Dust motes, thick as snow, swirled in the light. The hum grew louder, a resonant frequency that made my teeth ache and my vision blur at the edges. It was a sound that bypassed the ears, that spoke directly to the primal parts of my brain, the parts that understood things without needing to see them. And then my light found it. Not a machine, not a device, but a presence. It was amorphous, shifting, a coalescing of something that defied earthly description. It was like looking at a wound in reality, a tear through which something vast and incomprehensible was bleeding into our world. The signal wasn't broadcast, it was a byproduct of its very existence, a cosmic exhalation. I stumbled back, my hand flying to my mouth to stifle a gasp. The hum intensified, a chorus of impossible frequencies. Images flashed behind my eyes, not memories but impressions, geometries that twisted the mind. The crushing weight of eons. This was what had consumed the crew. Not fear, not violence, but simply absorption, an assimilation into a consciousness so alien, so utterly other, that our minds could only perceive it as an absence. The entity seemed to notice me. The pulsing green light flickered, and the hum shifted, a subtle dissonance creeping in. I could feel its attention, 1,000 icy fingers tracing the contours of my sanity. My training, my scientific detachment, all of it dissolved like salt in water. I couldn't understand it. I could only bear witness. The truth was a brutal, unforgiving thing. We were not the pinnacle of creation. We were specks, insignificant motes of dust, in a cosmos teeming with intelligences that would shatter our perception of existence. This entity, whatever it was, had merely brushed against our reality, and it had left a ship empty and a signal in its wake. My fingers fumbled for the emergency beacon on my belt. My mission had been to find the source. I had found it, and the only resolution I could offer was retreat, to warn, to try and make others understand, though understanding was a luxury I suspected we no longer possessed. The green light pulsed, a silent question hanging in the air. Was it curious, indifferent? Was it even aware of me as an individual, or just another ripple in the fabric it was slowly, inexorably unraveling? I backed away, my eyes never leaving the pulsating mass. The hum seemed to follow me, a phantom vibration in my skull. The fog outside felt less like a shroud and more like a shield, a merciful veil that hid the true horrors of the deep. As I stumbled out of the cargo hold, leaving the thrumming anomaly behind, I could still feel its presence. It hadn't followed me, not physically, but it had left its mark. The engines of the cargo ship, adrift in fog, crew gone. Engines running, continued their mournful drone. The fog had not lifted.